Call the meeting to order, 9:27, 5:31.
Second that.
Well,
Okay.
Motion.
yeah. But I need a motion for the agenda.
I move that the board approve the September 27, 2021 agenda.
I second that.
Motion made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah, we don't have anybody for public comment. So, past that. So we'll start our direct hearing.
Mr. President, I move the board approve the proposed tax rate of 5.003 for $3 per incidental and 1.3197 for debt service, for a total tax rate of $6.32 in compliance with RSMO section 137.073.2 based on Jackson County Notice of Assessed Valuation 2021.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Motion carries. Next, we'll go into our discussion items of restorative practices.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
We have quite a bit planned for tonight. Mostly we want to be reflective on what you would have us do. So we really want this to be a session where we hopefully get you some ideas about where we stand now, what we've done in the past, and what we could potentially do in the future. We heard from you at our last meeting that we really wanted to talk more about exactly what restorative practices is. So we did bring a team from CCR who's going to give us that presentation in a little bit. And we talked today, and one of the things I told them is that we really just want to be responsive to your questions and your direction. They have a presentation set, but there is no need to go through the presentation as it sits if you feel like you want to take it a different direction. So tonight is really yours, and we want to be responsive to what you would have us do. We are going to start off, though, talking about what we did, talked about at our committee meeting a few weeks back. So we brought back the same A team sitting across the front here, who is going to help us through what does this look like day to day. They're the ones that see it every day, and they've had some days this year. It's been some days quite a struggle. It's been tough getting back into the swing of things with COVID going on, and some students just struggle a little bit. So we've got Rachel Hibarzi here. She's going to be representing elementary. Jackie Garman will be representing middle school. Shenton Hammond is going to be representing the high school. And Michelle Blakely is here with RSA. And we'll give some time for them to give a little bit of idea about what they've done so far as restorative practices goes. Both, the formal version of restorative practices, as well as things we do that hit on some of the particulars of what restorative practices brings to the table. So as we did with the last time, I'm going to work through some data. So we'll establish where we are right now, and then we'll look back at what we've done, and then we'll look forward at what we could potentially do. If that's okay with everybody. Okay. Yep. All right, so we've got some charts. And the two big items that tend to be part of the discussion are these very vague terms that you hear, the disruptive and disrespectful behavior. They do tend to be catch-all terms. It's tough to really put your finger on what they are. It's one of those things like, you can't really define what disrespect is, but when it happens, you want to say, yeah, that was disrespectful. So that's one of the areas that it's so subjective that sometimes that can be one that maybe is overused, maybe is underused when it comes to disruption and disrespect. We want to take a look at just where we're at right now. So the top 3 bullets are where we stand with, and these are all 1920 numbers because that's the last sort of full year that we had. You remember we did stop in March of that year, but in elementary, You'll see 90% of the referrals that came to the office for disruptive behavior, those were handled with our variety of different methods of keeping the kid in the classroom. Through buddy rooms, maybe it was a conference, but the student was quickly discussed or whatever, and then moved back into the educational setting. 2% resulted in ISS, 1% in OSS. For the high school and middle school, it was a little bit different story. 65% were the warning, buddy room, recovery room, 31% ISS, 4% OSS. So we did have a little bit higher rise in the removal from the educational environment as a response. This is a graph we'll refer back to a couple times, because we were looking at not just disruption and disrespect, but also disproportionality. Disproportionality being that term of, are we disciplining students at about the same rate no matter what they look like or who they are? So this gives us a baseline of who we are as a district. So the big categories there being our black students, we have about 50%, Hispanic students about 15%, multiracial about 10%, and white at about 25-26%. So I want you to try to take a mental picture of three categories. Our black students at 50%, our multiracial at about 10% or about 9%, and our white at about 26%. So keep that in your mind as we go through these next slides. So this slide is showing our elementary students that were disciplined for disruption, whether it be the buddy room or whatever on the left, ISS in the middle, OSS on the right. What we would hope for is that the graphs here would match the graph here. So in other words, we'll look at just our black students for now. We have 50% of our black students in the district. We would hope to see 50% of our black students represented in the different discipline categories here. And you'll see in buddy room, he was closer to 60%. When we look at ISS, it was about 52, 53%. OSS down around 40%, 38% or so. So there was not a completely great reflection. As a matter of fact, in OSS, where we see the disproportionality there, remember I asked you to remember the multiracial and the white as well. White, pretty close. We have about 10% of our population is white. 20% actually at OSS. Actually, I'd say this, well, no, it was 26%, wasn't it? I'm sorry, 26%. So a little bit fewer students in OSS than you would anticipate. But our multiracial students, we only have 10% of those. About 21% actually had OSSs. So the disproportionality in OSS or elementary school would have been in our multiracial students. But we had far fewer black students than what you would anticipate. So, now, keep a visual of this graph, and I'll move to secondary. So, elementary, secondary. The thing that jumps out as a visual there, at least for me, is that you do see a much greater proportion of black students that are disciplined in all three categories, either buddy rooms or ISS or OSS. So here's where the disproportionality starts to show. We actually see about, when I'm looking at OSS here, our multiracial students about what you would expect, our white students about half of what you would expect. And our black students at about 70%, where you would anticipate them to be at 50%. Okay. Please stop me if there's questions. This is a bunch of numbers I'm throwing out at you. So this graph, we're looking at just a comparison of middle school to high school, because one of the thoughts is, at least in me, when I think of disruption and disrespect, I tend to think middle school more than high school, because middle school, that's just kind of how a middle schooler is. They're learning how to deal with life. They can be very disruptive, very antsy. We actually see that it's really more of our high school students that we're seeing for the disruptive behaviors. But one of the things to bring away from this graph is that we do see the disproportionality from middle school and high school. It's across the board. We're a little closer in middle school than we are in high school, but the disproportionality does exist there. All right, so disrespect. Now, one of the interesting things about disruption and disrespect is they often are hand in hand. If I have a student that's being very disruptive in class, they are probably being disrespectful as well, because as they're being disruptive, what's the teacher doing? Stop that, go back to your seat, and what's the kid doing? Not that, okay? And so that can be disrespectful because they're not listening to what I'm having them do. It can also go the other direction. The student starts out being disrespectful, and as a teacher I can deal with that, I can work with the student with that, but then I've got 20 other kids that are being entertained by the disrespect, and so now it turns into disruption. So they're often hand in hand. But here we see very similar numbers. I'm not going to go through them as I did with the disruption. The numbers really mirror. You're seeing pretty much the same thing. The graphs, the same disproportionality, very similar in nature to the disruption graphs. And we see the larger disproportionality at the high school and middle school than we do at the elementary school. And this graph also very similar. We're seeing the same. It's happening in middle school and high school. High school, a little bit more of the disproportionality than the middle school, except in the ISS category. Actually, the middle school has a little bit greater disproportionality there. But also the buddy room. So we also broke down the discipline by, for every referral that comes in, what happens with the student. So here again, to give the visual, we have the ISS and OSS, that's where we're really removing students from the educational setting. You'll notice that takes up about 15% of the graph. 85% of the time we get a referral, we are working in some way to either keep that student in class or reintegrate them into class fairly quickly. So these strategies of the buddy room and the recovery room, all are ways of getting the student back in. Of course, the detention, that's outside of the educational setting entirely. Conferences, that sort of thing. We're getting those kids back into class as much as we can, as early as we can.
Is a conference with a parent room?
Conference could be with a whole lot of different folks. Could be with an interventionist, could be with an assistant principal, could be with the principal, could be with a teacher, could be with a counselor, social worker.
Okay.
It's a very large catch-all.
Brian, what is the difference between the recovery room and the buddy room? I know the buddy room has to deal in the classroom, but what takes place in the recovery room?
The buddy room is actually not still in the classroom. We have a safe seat in the classroom.
Oh, that's right.
So then that's actually the progression, typically. If you're having a little bit of trouble, I might have you go back to the safe seat, which is removal from the immediate environment, but I'm still in the classroom. A buddy room is going to be a classroom that's typically next door. I've got a teacher I partner with. You get mine, I get yours, and they'll go over and finish, either work on their work or maybe finish a think sheet or that sort of thing in the buddy room. And that's typically a class period, although if you follow the BIST continuum appropriately, they actually have to work their way back into the classroom by owning behavior, saying what they did, trying to make amends with this teacher or with whoever it is that they've been having trouble with. The recovery room is a step beyond that even. So that's a different room in the building where they may have trouble in the buddy room, and so they're going to the recovery room. They also may go straight to the recovery room depending on the kind of behaviors.
Is there a teacher in that recovery room with them?
There is. Yes.
What's the thought process behind how buddy rooms will change behavior? Is it just removing them from the situation?
Right. And it's also and actually, you know what, I'm going to have Rachel talk a little bit about that because she is outstanding at this. And so talk a little bit about what we do with the BIST process when it comes to these.
So as far as changing behavior when they go to a buddy room, for example, sometimes it depends on what the behavior is. I know sometimes just the change of environment kind of helps that student like reset their day or reset that period of time, or maybe they just really need to get away from some of their peers within that space. And so the buddy room is a great place for them to be able to do that, because a lot of times we try to partner with the same grade level, and so they're still hearing that same grade level content, so they're still in the education environment even though it may not be their homeroom teacher. So we work really hard at doing that as well. But it kind of gives them that opportunity to kind of keep it small still, even though they're not in their homeroom teacher's classroom, they're still in that grade level classroom as much as possible, so they're still getting that education, you know, when they're in their buddy room. And then it's just a matter of, we kind of work through that depending on, I've been at a variety of buildings in the district, but as far as think sheets and things like that go, as a tool to help them kind of process, you know, what they were thinking about, how they were feeling, and maybe the impact that they've had on someone else or their own self for that matter. We use those depending on the building and depending on the student, but they're typical. Like at Westridge, for example, we've just reworked ours to incorporate Trauma Smart, so we're really tying that back into, you know, how are you feeling? What did you need when you had that feeling? And then how are you feeling now? And do you need to do anything to fix the relationship with someone else? And so we really kind of go through that, and that's part of that buddy room or recovery process.
And we do that in secondary too.
Our buddy room is our advisory teacher, because we really are trying to make that relationship, that advisory teacher is your first advocate. So that's where they go back to buddy room. That same process. It kind of takes the emotion out sometimes, because things can be elevated on the student end and the teacher end. So it just is a change of scenery, gives us some time to think, and the real beauty of it is the processing. When we come back the next day and we're able to talk through that's when the change of behavior hopefully is taking place. But we need to all be at the right frame of mind and mindset to do that appropriately.
So the student stays with the buddy room teacher for the day? So
No.
it doesn't?
So sometimes we do have to outlast some behaviors as far as with students go, but that homeroom teacher is still constantly trying to check in. So that may mean like I would go and cover the homeroom teacher if the student is still in the buddy room, but we really try to get them back to their classroom as soon as we're ready to show that we're ready to be back in the learning environment. Because that, like, we don't want anytime. We always tell our teachers, anytime that they're away from you, that's breaking our relationship. So we want to try to keep them with you as much as possible. And so the more or the longer time period that they're out of your classroom, that's breaking that relationship. So we do try to work our way back as quickly as we can.
So have you ever had students who have to go to a grade higher than where he actually is?
There are times where that happens, yes. And sometimes we partner students with, for example, the check-in or check-out teacher. So if a student is on a tier plan, for example, then they already have that relationship with that teacher. So kind of like in middle school, they have that advisory teacher. Sometimes with elementary kids, we partner them with a teacher they could have next year, or a teacher that maybe they're in a club who live together, like Girls on the Run or something like that. And so we partner them with those teachers so that they have that relationship with them and they already know the things that they're working on, for example, if they're a behavior plan student. And so that way they can have those conversations to try to get them back to, we call it back in their front seat, so that they're ready to go to class.
You know, I'm just thinking, a student is in a class that is not his homeroom class. I mean, that's grade higher. I know I heard you said something about the fact that they already have their study plans and all of that. So is this always the case, that they always have material to do in that classroom? They're not like feeling the oddball because this is not their grade level or what have you?
I hear that perspective, and I do think that in some cases that could be possible. Like, I'm sure it's not perfect every single time. But I do think, I know, for example, particularly in my building or the buildings that I've been in, when a student goes to a buddy room, the teacher has the expectations as far as, you know, what the expectation is while you're here, and then all the things that you need to be successful in the materials that you have at that safe seat spot. Because essentially, it's basically a safe seat just in someone else's classroom. So what you can do there, how you're gonna let your teacher know that you need something or whatnot, all of those things are posted and there. And so it's just like they were in a safe seat at their own classroom, because all the expectations are the same across the building. So they have the tools, like we have calm down boxes, for example. So if they need to use those tools to get them to where they're kind of in that, in their front seat, if you will. We're a trauma smart school also at Westridge, and so we use that terminology a lot, like the trunk is, we're escalated, we're upset, in the front seat, we're good to go. And so sometimes we use those calm down tools to help us get there, and then that helps us get, to show the buddy room teacher that we're ready to process and move back to class.
Thank you.
So who makes that determination? That they're ready? I mean, is it just
I
the
always
kids
say the
saying that
student
they're
does.
ready?
I always say the student does, and like, I know in my building, my student, I'll know that you're ready, or your teacher will know that you're ready when you are doing these things. Like, and so it has like, these basic things that they're gonna need to show that they're ready. So if I'm sitting, I'm calm, my calm down tools are put away, I've done the task. I always say a task because a task might be a thing sheet for that student, or a task might be a math problem, depending on what the situation is. And so they know what their task is before they go. And so those are all like, that's our accountability. Like, we have a little visual that we use, and it's on all of our safe seats in our building, like on the wall, so that they know. And so anytime, even if I just come in passing and I can tell either a kid's ready, I will point out to them like, hey, I can see that you're ready because I see these things. Or if they're not ready, I say, hey, which one of these things do we need to work on? And so then they're like, oh, okay. So then they're not just left like feeling like they're hanging, just sitting there in the buddy room all day. We try, that is not what we ever want to do, and that's typically not, in my experience so far, that's not usually what we see, because we want to get them back to class, and we want to help them work through any of their feelings or any of the problems that they've had.
Is there a time that, when would the parent be contacted?
Anytime a student leaves the learning environment, they're called. They're called, and I usually say call, email if you can't get a hold of anyone. So some teachers, they're really great about, like, let's say they're in a buddy room right before special, so right before their plan time. They'll call right then in the middle of the day during plan time and say, hey, just want to let you know, so-and-so's in a buddy room right now, just let you know. And there's times where, we do call right away, if the teacher can. And then other times it may be at the end of the day, so.
Is there a maximum time to be in a recovery room?
In the recovery room?
Or, yeah. Does it go on, can it go on for days?
If the student needed to do so and we're possibly like on a refocus plan, for example. So we follow a tiered system for our behavior supports. And so we have tier 3 is our highest level of support. So I would hope that if a student needed to be in recovery, we would have already kind of planned and known that this student needed that level of support. And so they would have already been on a tier 3 plan. And so then at that point, I would have contacted district supports as well, because we have our behavior supports that they would come in. I would also contact my colleagues as well. But if they needed that level of support where they needed to be in recovery, we call that a refocus plan. And so that would be, they would be in recovery basically all day, and they would be working their way back to where we're showing these behaviors and we're showing that we're ready. Now we're going to add this chunk of time. However, that would have been a team decision that we would have made, not only with all of our district people, but counselor, our social worker, the parents, and then had a discussion with the student as well.
So keep in mind that what you just described there as a recovery room, what she was describing before was a buddy room.
Buddy room, yeah.
So buddy room, kid isn't in there,
Right.
average maybe a
few hours?
half hour?
Not even a few hours.
Yeah.
I would say at most a half hour.
Yeah.
We always try to do like basically by that content. So like, okay, we went during math, so we're really going to work to make sure that buddy room teacher is going to be aware, oh, when I transition to ELA, I'm going to go check in with my buddy room student so that I can see that they're ready so they can go back to class.
Yeah.
And so we usually try to be that content time.
And the same thing with middle school.
Middle school classes are about 50 minutes, so when you're sent to a buddy room, you're there for the rest of the hour. The only reason you would then, maybe if you're still agitated, visibly upset, you may then transfer to the recovery room if you're not ready to move on. But in middle school, you move to the next teacher, the next personality. Usually at the end of that hour, they're good to go to the next class. And then the next morning in advisory is when they would go and process with that teacher or wherever the incident happened to kind of get things right for the following day.
Can someone, I'm so sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, can someone talk extensively about the recovery rooms and buddy rooms? Can someone walk me through, I'm familiar with ISS, but here in Raytown, what that looks like on your elementary and your secondary levels. So just in terms of how extensive that support is, the interventions, and then just from my understanding, like how are we avoiding some of those gaps in students' knowledge because they're missing their class time. And I know unless those rooms are run pretty effectively, they're going to continue to get further and further behind. We're going to keep perpetuating a cycle that we don't want. So can someone walk me briefly through that on each level?
Give Rachel a break. I'll start with middle
Okay.
school. ISS, and you're right, it works as beautifully as the staff you have manning it. So we've been very fortunate. That is communicated out as early to teachers as possible, whether that's through the assistant principal who assigns that discipline, that's where that's going to come from. So teachers know, I have this many kids in ISS next day, have work prepared. Our ISS teacher in our building will also email out, and he asks that the teacher emails the student directly their work and carbon him on it. So he is aware, but ultimately it's the student's responsibility to get that information and take care of what they need to do. So the day is very structured. So you start in the morning with some just general expectations, and then you just kind of flow right into that first subject. And that way everybody's working on math at the same time, so the teacher knows who's supporting math, or if there's a couple of students who are able to help one another if needed and they're at the right place where they can do that together, then that can happen, and then they will move on to language arts or go through their day that way. If you're not successful in ISS, then sometimes you end up spending a little more time there, because when we assign ISS, we'll communicate to student and parent, we need 3 successful days. And successful means you're doing your work, you're following rules, that's success. If you're not able to do that, your time may get extended, and then that is immediately communicated to parents and teachers so that they can provide. One thing at middle school that we are really stressing, and every email that goes out, whether it's from an assistant principal or the ISS teacher, is that please come on your plan, your lunch, and reconnect with these kids. If a child's in there for 2 to 3 days, they do not need to, again, anytime they're away, you're breaking that relationship. So we want kids to see you. We want them to see their teacher so they have a chance to ask questions, so they don't sit there stuck. You know, if they don't know what they're doing, an ISS teacher hasn't had the chance to help them. And just that relationship again, that you don't go 3 days without seeing this child and then they just reappear in your classroom.
Then is that optional? Is that like something you strongly suggest, or is that something that is faithfully followed with fidelity?
It is September and it is working really good right now. Will it be in November? We might need more reminders in November, and that's just honest. Things get busy and people get busy, but it's something that we're putting out there to teachers every single time it happens. And then if there needs to be individual conversations, then that would fall back to the assistant principals to do that with teachers.
At the high school, I would like to start off with the recovery room, because our recovery room is very important to our existence. So most time the student is sent down, they're sent to the recovery room. And our goal in the recovery room is for them not to be there any longer than 10 minutes. We don't want them to miss 10 minutes, more than 10 minutes of class. So they're given a sheet, they process what happened, what took place, and it's up to the interventionist to see how they process. If they process through and they can answer all the questions, hey, what was your part in this? What was the teacher part? What could you do better? And they can process through that, they can make it back to class within 5 or 10 minutes. If they can't process through that, then the interventionist kind of see if there are any other things that they need in regards to processing back to class. So is it a counselor that you need to see? Is it a social worker? Is it the therapist? What is it that you need? And so that's up to the interventionist, and sometimes they can't process, and so what we do is we give them a little more time. A lot of times they contact parents and say, hey, this is why he was sent out today. This person is not understanding. Hey, can you help me out with this? Sometimes they have to, and if they still can't process, then sometimes they do have to come see me. And when they come see me, we listen to what the student has to say, how they feel, what's going on, and then I try to process through with them. Sometimes it may take the hour. What we try to do is we tell the student, okay, so you cannot go back to next hour. You can go to all the rest of your classes, but you can't go back to this class, this math class, for instance, until we process through and we figure out how to get you back in class where you can function. That is important because to me and to us at South, it's like, you know, you're going to be working in a couple of years. We want you to have that skill of how to process through an issue so that you're successful in life. And so that's what our recovery room is like. Our ISS room, again, it's more structured like everyone else. Not only do they have their assignments that they have on Google Classroom, but they have an assignment, like a PBS assignment, and it talks them through what happened, what can I do different next time. You know, it's about a 20-minute lesson each day that they go through, so that we can say that, hey, you're not just here. This is not just we want to punish you. We want you to understand what you did. We want you to next time know what to do. And who are the adults? And I think the most important process is who are the adults that you can talk to in the school. And they write that down, and so that we are able to connect that student with the adult before something happens the next time.
When you say process, I know a lot of people are what I hear. I mean, is that like confession? Is that like
No, it's not.
like admission of guilt?
No, it's.
I mean, what is it? What are they? Just something they could have done differently?
Yes.
Okay.
It's something they could have done differently, and who can, if you're in crisis mode, who can you talk to in the building where you don't get where you don't end up in ISS the next time?
And how often does the processing, how successful is that? That's something that's usual, 10 minutes, or is that something that's rare?
Recovery?
Yeah.
Recovery, it's usually quick, and they get it, they understand. Sometimes ISS, it may take a day or two, and you know, sometimes what we tell our students is, you know, if they process well, they get done with their work, you know, you did a very good job processing, you can get out a day early. You know, so it's more of a, we're not trying to put our thumb down on students. We want them to learn the process, especially our younger students. Our older students get it. It's our younger students that we have to teach how to be a young adult coming from an environment where they may not have been as accountable for what they play a lot. And so they think it's okay to play in the halls. They think it's okay to be tardy. And what we're trying to do is say, hey, we want you to be able to function in the school society.
One of the things too that, you know, there's a big term for this, it's called antecedent behavior. But one of the things that they also work through is to try to figure out, okay, why? Why did you do what you did? And sometimes it's because I was just being silly. Sometimes it's because, you know, my mom yelled at me this morning. And sometimes that antecedent behavior helps us to connect them up with more supports that we have within the building.
I think we've talked a lot about recovery and the reactive process. So something's happened and the child lands there. We also, I think at all levels, there's a very proactive piece of recovery. So our kids on tier plans, many of them have scheduled breaks where they go to recovery. They're a struggling reader, so reading block is really hard for them. So every day they get a quick little 3-minute check-in with Mr. Oliver. They have a scheduled break. Those would be proactive minutes in recovery. You're not in trouble. This is just giving you what you need. So there is a proactive side to recovery as well.
But RSA.
Well, we have kindergarten through 12th grade, so we kind of utilize our recovery room a little differently. Our recovery room, we usually try to keep that for our K-8 students. And then for those high school students that do need time, they will usually go either to the social workers, or they'll come to myself or Dr. Grace and kind of do the processing like that, so we don't have our intervention is overloaded in the recovery room. Also, we use the recovery room for ISS, and so when we use that, we kind of have a tracking system. So if the students are in there each hour, we're fortunate enough to have IAs that are with the students in the classroom. Each teacher has an IA, And so the IA will come down and check on the student and then go back to the teacher and let them know if they need additional work, any of that kind of thing. And then we have a tracking point system, and so they get points by the hour, and then they have to gain a certain amount of points for the day, and if they're successful, then that day counts, and then that goes towards however many days they have for ISS. So that's how we kind of track when they're in ISS. As far as the processing, we do go through the BIS continuum as far as processing, like they mentioned, but we also were fortunate enough to go through the restorative justice, which you guys will hear about later, so we kind of incorporated a little bit of that within our process. And so when they meet with the social workers, a lot of those things, we kind of go back to the why of the behavior, and we try to be proactive, so we can kind of alleviate some of that time that they're in the intervention with the interventionist.
You notice a lot of common language that's done through BIST, and it is this kind of positive language where we're getting at what behaviors we expect rather than what behaviors we don't want to see again. So you hear that a few times across here. That is a big cornerstone to try to teach appropriate behaviors. We believe from pre-K through 12, no matter what building we're in, that we learn behaviors just like we learn math. It's an important thing, a skill to teach, and a skill that students are going to get wrong every once in a while, and we help them to get it right. One thing we should also point out, we don't do the BIST, this is all BIST that we've been talking about here, we don't do the BIST at the high school nearly to the extent that we do it at the elementary school, and it kind of progresses through. Students, it is so pervasive in what we do, the students kind of, it happens so much, they hear it all the time, they get tired of being bisted, what they say. And so by the time they get to middle school, they're kind of getting over it. In high school, you start talking about think sheets and buddy rooms and safe seats, and they look at you like you're crazy. Don't treat me like I'm 3, you know? So we do try to morph with the maturity level of the student, but you did still hear the pervasiveness of the language. We just change how we do it. We change, so the recovery room starts to look a lot more like a buddy room.
Yes.
Is really what it does. We're trying to meet the maturity level of the students there.
So what happens with the think sheets and I mean, does that, like in high school, does that follow them through all the teachers and things like that? Or?
It's not part of the file.
No. It's just, yeah, it's really a tool for them to use, like in the elementary setting. And I'm going to be honest with you, some of my kids we use think sheets for, and some of them that's not an effective tool. I know as soon as I hand the student a think sheet, we're gonna have another behavior. So I know that about my kids. The power behind the think sheet is the processing piece, the having the conversation of, you know, what feeling were you having at this time? You know, them being able to identify their feelings and what they need when they have that feeling. Or where can they go when they have that feeling? How can we support you when you have that feeling? Because that's a large part of it. Just like in high school, they're trying to figure out how to be people. You know, how to manage when somebody makes us mad or when this work is really hard. And so that's the power of the think sheet, if you will. And so we've kind of added that other piece too of, okay, when I have that feeling, what do I need? And then how do you feel now? And then what, are there any relationships that we need to repair? And how are we going to do that? And so it gives them choices of, oh, I could draw them a picture, I could write a letter, I could talk to them, or whatever it may be, so that they can repair that relationship as well. And sometimes it may not even have to do with someone else. It may have to be with their own self. Oh, like I need to show myself some self-love because I just got really frustrated with myself, you know? And so kind of teaching them that whole thought process of doing that. That's just, we're in the business of teaching and learning, and we have to do that too with our emotions and how we go about our day.
Think sheets at middle school we don't use a lot. There are some of our 6th graders who are so used to it from elementary that they need their think sheet to get their thoughts out. Generally, we just try to do that through conversation and through the process.
Same in high school, basically. It's not something that follows them. It's more of a conversation with adults, and hopefully that conversation teaches our students how to have a conversation with adults instead of at an adult, or so I think that's the most important part that most of our students learn, is how to have that conversation, and also how to let an adult know how you feel without the anger. This is how what you said made me feel, and that is not insulting to an adult.
So I have a question. I'm sorry, were you trying to? So we're talking a lot about the responsibility of what the student, you're coaching them, how to cope and talk with adults. Do we do any coaching with the adults in the situation as well? Because based on these statistics, we are seeing that disproportionality there. And I mean, I know for some cases these are more extensive. I think we've discussed this in our prior meetings, but overall, is there like a routine, like conversation that you have with the adults? Because sometimes when the students are trying to cope, things can be escalated. And so what are those conversations we're having with our teachers and other people who are with our students?
Well, at the high school, what we do is first we find out what happened. We'll talk to the teacher, we'll talk to the student, and we'll figure out what happened. And I'll ask a teacher, hey, is there, just like we asked a student, do you think there is another way that we could have handled this? And if they say no, and we know that something is wrong or something wasn't quite kosher with this, how the teacher said it, or we'll have that conversation. Well, let's roll. We role play. We talk. We go in. We do walkthroughs. We do observations. If I see an exceptional number of students coming out of one class, I definitely do walkthroughs in that class. Maybe once, maybe twice a week, just in different classes, just to see how students interact with that teacher, and maybe there are some different examples that we can give to that teacher from what I see in the classroom that can help that person.
Sean, could you talk a little bit further too, when you talk about the disproportionality, there's a whole other process we can talk about here, and that's what we're doing with our Cultural Competency Committee.
Yes.
And so part of what we own as people is that we do have unconscious biases. We approach situations based on our own history. We all do. And recognizing those unconscious biases and knowing how I'm going to behave in a certain situation is important.
Yes.
You might talk a little bit about what your building is doing around that.
So I will give you an example. At the football game on Friday, I approached a student. I was like, excuse me, can you be here? And he's like, bro, go on with that. And I was like, huh? And so I said, hey, can I talk to you for a second? He's like, Mr. Hammond, you came to me wrong, man. I was like, well, you know what? I can apologize for what I said. I said, but what I need for you to understand that when you're at a football game, if I ask you to do something and there may be an emergency or something, I want you to be able to do what I ask you without you having to question me. So if I came at you wrong, then I'm sorry. So it's about, as Dr. Huff said, it's about finding out what our biases are and taking those to improve our relationship with students. So for instance, if it's something with boys who sag and have dreads, well, I need to understand that, hey, you know what? This is how I feel because I feel that everybody should be clean cut and have their pants up. I need to get over myself and say, hey, this is still a person. And how can I work with this person so that we can get along in this school and that you're going to be successful and I don't have to make myself feel better. And so that was a hard conversation that I had to have with myself also, because I have expectations of students. I think that, for instance, one of my expectations was that as we were talking, if you're going to get a job, you need to go with a tie, you need to be clean cut, and you need to look this way. Well, everyone didn't grow up with, you have to be 3 times better of a person, like my parents taught me. But you have to be yourself, because if you don't be yourself, you're not going to get the job. So it's working through my biases with our students so that I can be a better administrator and a better person for our students.
And talk about your Cultural Competency Committee and how they're working with the rest of your staff.
Right now, we're reading how to be an anti-racist
That's a really,
as a staff.
that's good.
And again, I had to look at myself also. It's not just, I don't want you to think that it's just white staff. It's all of us as a staff. We all have our biases, as Dr. Huff said, and we have to, we're reading, and it's kind of difficult because everyone doesn't see the world the same way. And just because I feel one way, I have to still respect how this other person feels, even though I don't agree with that. So it's teaching us as a staff that we're not all the same, but yet we have the common goal of teaching our students, accepting our students for who they are and who they will be.
And so we're
Dr.
taking,
Huff. I'm sorry. Dr.
I'm sorry, I
Huff.
was going to say, we're taking the long, slow road with this.
Yes.
And we know that to change the hearts and minds of adults, it is not a 1 hour PD and we move on and we're all fixed. We are talking about a long process that we are committed to working through. I'm sorry to speak.
Oh, no, thank you very much. Let me pause and say thank you to the A team. On August the 31st, the policy committee, Bobby Salisbury, Natalie Johnson-Berry, myself, and also there was Alfonso Burton. I had the opportunity to have this information presented to us, and we also had the opportunity to take it to the full board. I think it is so important, and I'm so glad that you could come back. Actually, my other question was along the lines of what Natalie asked in regards to the teacher or adult responsibility in the classroom. Clearly, each of you are great leaders, and I'm sure your leadership permeates throughout your staff. However, in any school, with any organization, there are going to be those that don't necessarily understand or don't necessarily agree or don't necessarily execute what the vision is. So you did a great job letting us know that you do monitor that, and I'm sure as great leaders you do, that you do intervene with that, but without any type of accountability, or is there accountability, if what you see is not in line with your vision or the vision of the district?
I do a lot of processing with teachers. I'm never going to put a kid in a situation where I don't feel like maybe the adult's not ready either. You spend a lot of time teaching kids how to be appropriate, and it would take 10 seconds of an adult modeling for them the wrong thing to just destroy all of that. That's too much work to do that. So when I know there's a situation or a rub or a pattern of behavior, I'm going to spend time with that adult first. And I think with anything in dealing with staff, it's always coachable moments. So you coach and you hope you start to see some change in behavior, and when you don't, then that's when that becomes an evaluation kind of sort of thing, and it moves on to a whole different level. Because this is how we're going to do things here, and I'm going to give you these supports, and I'm going to help you, and I'm going to model, and I'll be right there with you. At some point, you buy in, or else we're looking at a whole different process.
Thank you. One more thing, Dr. Huff, you introduced the conversation about the district's cultural competency program.
Yes.
We know that this is a voluntary program, so I appreciate your high school taking on that charge and working and striving to help us all understand, to see, to recognize any cultural biases or blind spots that we have. You also mentioned that the district is taking a very slow approach. I was going to say methodical, but I don't know that that's a word you use. Deliberate, thank you.
How's that?
That's wonderful. And how long have we been working with the cultural competency program in the district?
Cultural Competency Committee's 5 years? Yeah. And keep in mind that we have a large gap in the middle here where it's been hard. We're all starting over this year, unfortunately. And I will, so I wouldn't use the word voluntary. And now to be on the Cultural Competency Committee, the district committee, that is voluntary. But the Cultural Competency Committees at the buildings, that's actually part of our C&I goals. There's nothing voluntary about it. We will have cultural competency committee at each one of the buildings, and there will be activities at each of the buildings with all staff around cultural competency. It's part of who we are.
And maybe voluntary is not the right term because you have the committees at each school. But does every teacher have to participate, or is it PD, or is it something that every teacher buys into? But that aside,
Yeah.
it is deliberate, so what are the next steps?
Right, and actually, I think it'd be great for, Tony, you want to talk a little bit about what we're doing with Cultural Competency Committee?
Sure. It's actually starting our 4th year. Considered last year, we pretty much just did Zoom meetings due to COVID. We weren't really here full-time the whole time. This year, we're actually moving into beginning to review and evaluate district policies and practices, basically like an equity audit, to begin looking at those practices, not just in curriculum instruction, of course we're starting there, but also in terms of different departments, HR, hiring practices. Already I work closely with Dr. DeVille a lot of times on recruitment efforts and those kinds of things as well. That was going to be our biggest push this year. I say going to be, last year our first meeting really was postponed because we didn't have enough substitute teachers. And so our next meeting is going to be via Zoom, but the goal is to begin looking at the equity audit this year and moving forward from there at that point. And then of course, each building does have a contact person and has a committee that handles the activities, and the principals at the beginning of the year share with me and Dr. Huff all of the activities and professional development learning that's going on in their buildings. Dr. Huff and I also do training from time to time. I just did a training with Northeast staff last week on microaggressions and identifying bias. It was very, very good for the staff. And so we found to be true at this point, we have trained all of our teachers. We did it simultaneously. I guess I didn't say simultaneously, but we did all the secondary teachers one time, the middle school teachers, elementary. And this year, really, all the buildings have tied plans into their CPL plans, the Committee for Professional Learning, and have allotted dollars to that. As we speak, there is no specific training this year that we have said we would do with every teacher, but that's being monitored pretty much on a building by building basis.
Are there benchmarks that will allow us to be able to determine if cultural competency and recognizing our biases is making a difference with our students and how we work with our students?
At this time, no, but that is definitely something that we plan on going forward with based on information we get from the equity audit.
Well, also I'll say that the disproportionality information that we bring up, this is discipline. We have other disproportionality measures that we could talk about. And those are the numbers that we would talk about. So discipline, yes, but there's lots of others. ACT scores, number of students in advanced courses, number of students in STUCO, the students that are participating in our plays, in our, there's all kinds of measures that we can go about. And so taking a look at our equity audit helps us set that baseline. So I do hope that when I say that we are being deliberate, it doesn't mean we're trying to be slow, although I think I use the word slow. What we do want to do is make sure that we're going about it in such a way that we're bringing everybody along. And so it doesn't feel like, I'll use the example of a book that I just got done with, actually, this book called Better Than Carrots and Sticks. And the whole premise of it is that you can beat a rabbit into the hole with a stick, you can cajole it into the hole with a carrot. Either way, the rabbit is surprised they're in the hole and has no idea what they're doing there. The better way to do it is to convince the rabbit to be in the hole. To convince the rabbit to be in the hole takes time. And it is about changing the heart of our folks. And that takes time. So it's not that we're trying to be slow, it's that we're trying to be deliberate so that we get there together and we get there in a very strong way. And that's the Cultural Competency Committee, I think, has a very good task with that. But it has been a bit herky-jerky lately. As you mentioned, we were supposed to have a meeting last week. Darn it. So that we can't take, we're already covering classes with teachers every period. And, as you know, it's not any fun to cover a class that doesn't have a sub on your plan time. So,
I guess I am more, I believe in the teachers of this district and our school leaders, and I know the great majority of teachers, they do see the need for this, and they do understand that, and there are probably a few outliers, and so when we talk about changing you have to change the heart of the person. I mean, after so much time, for some people, you're not going to change that because this is the vision, this is what we do here, this is about supporting kids, and the great majority of teachers, they're there, school leaders and everything else, but the outliers, I mean, do we take a stand at some point and say to the handful?
so you're right. What I'd call that is critical mass, which is absolutely what our thought is that you do train those up. And at some point in time when you start, it may be uncomfortable to have, as Checkin had mentioned, the conversations are uncomfortable. They take on a different kind of uncomfortableness the farther you go down the road, don't they? To where I am now uncomfortable because I'm an outlier. Now, we move from uncomfortable to perhaps you should explore other career options. Because this is who we are. And you're right. You go down that road to a point where we hit that critical mass, and then we're expecting everybody to be there with us. So, yeah, it is a good process.
Yeah, that's also shown in some of our numbers as far as, I'd be interested in knowing, like, we see the number of incidents, and how many of those students, how many different students are those, and also looks like, we got 70 teachers who are more than 10 referrals. And that's just based on the graph that looks high. So, and I think it is good to lead the rabbit into the hole with a carrot, but we're actually not going into a hole. But just like you can be comforted with the rod and the staff. And so I think there's some accountability measures maybe that can be, as far even when it comes to a kid, they have a progression, and maybe our teachers can have some of those same things.
We're singing the same song here. It is not okay to treat students differently because of who they are. And do we separate with teachers already? Yeah. And you all hear those stories of the ones that we put on leave and that sort of thing. That is most certainly in place. We do want to move that direction with being deliberate, and everybody needs to come in this direction with us, because the bottom line is we want to see changes. And this is the graph you're referring to. We want to see the right hand of this graph go off. And this is where, as Checkin had mentioned, that when you get to a teacher that is sending down an inordinate number of referrals, that should not be a comfortable place. So.
Is that per year? That's like for 1920
This is for the one school year, yes. Number of referrals, and this is number of referrals that resulted in discipline. So this does not include, because in elementary, you're going to have some folks that have way more than that, because they include a buddy room as a referral, right? So that's part of a process, though. That's not, inordinate to a kid. That's part of a process. But yeah, if we're getting detention, ISS, OSS, that's on this checklist.
One thing too, also, I think as we grow into this even more, I don't know that even our distinctions between the different groups, even black and white, I don't know, no kid has a discipline problem because of their skin color, black or white. And so when it comes to differentiating between some of those reasons why, I think we'll better understand why some of this disproportionality, it might be disproportionate in some other area.
You're absolutely right, and we do look at things like poverty as an example, disproportionality based on poverty. So what we believe, if you have a student that comes into your class and has poor math skills, what do? You scaffold to give them the student what they need as far as math goes. We may have students that come to us with poor behavior management skills, whatever it may be. There's all a litany of reasons as to why. We work with that student to build their skills up, no matter who they are or where they come from. Because, as you said, that skill is not more likely because of any trait that student has. So the poor student is not more likely to have a misbehaving trait as part of who they are. They may have an environmental issue where they've learned behaviors that are not appropriate. We have some kindergartners that we get that we have a lot of training to do because they come to us and it's surprising. But we don't cast that kid away, we train them. And knowing that they might need a little bit more support. And that's why we use that, that differentiation for our students, that we give them the supports that they need. That's a great point. So I feel like we've hammered through this stuff. I'm going to hit one more slide here. And just say that this is the slide that shows our students, the number of referrals, percentage of OSS we have by their demographic. So the blue line being our black students, and then the white students below that, the multiracial and Hispanic. Multiracial than white and Hispanic. What we want to see, there's two things I'd like to see from this graph. One is the lines should be on the exact same line. There should not be four separate lines. There should be one line. So we want to see the lines come together to where eventually they meet and they become one line. We also would like to see the line lower than where it is. Now, I'm going to say this, that our principals, our assistant principals, could change this tomorrow. They could have less suspensions tomorrow. From here on out, they just stop suspending students. That's probably not the best direction to go. We want to change behaviors. We want to change behaviors in such a way that we don't have this need to do this kind of thing anymore, because our students and our staff all interact well with each other, have good relationships, and we're able to modify behaviors as they come up, because we will always have behaviors. I would imagine you guys can think of times in the last year that you've had behaviors. I can. I've had behaviors. We learn to work through that. Folks around us learn to help us. Same thing with our students. We teach them through, help them to have these behaviors in appropriate ways. All right, so that's our data. You also have a sheet. You have two other pieces of information I'm not going to go through in detail. One of them is a sheet that looks like this. This is board committee meeting. It has focus on discipline reduction. It's about a 5-page document, or more, about an 8-page document. And it goes through really a scenario of how we could bring this sort of program to Raytown. How could we have this option for us where we are trying to meet the needs of students without bringing them out of, taking them out of the educational environment as often as we might. So what would restorative practice look like for us? How do we go about bringing it to bear? What are some more, important points? Just in summary, we feel it's important to involve staff in the process. We should incorporate some of our current practices, which we have talked about here. We are a long way down the road. We should not abandon what we've done for a new program. But how can we meld what we're doing and keep moving towards something that's even better? Providing training, providing appropriate staff. There's a lot to it. And I did have I had a sheet that we gave to the committee that I did not put here because the board had talked about doing an RFP, so I didn't think it was appropriate to put the money that CCR gave us an estimate of what it might cost. I will say that over a 5-year period, the training alone would cost somewhere in the $1 million range. And that's, of course, we'd go out for an RFP to get a better idea about what the competitive bidding process would give us. But that does give us an idea as a board as to what this commitment would be. That is not including the additional staff we need to have, which would probably be in the 10 to 20 staff member range. And you're probably talking about another $1 million for the staff, which would be ongoing cost, like $1 million a year kind of cost. The training cost is a one-time cost that we would need to follow up with by hopefully having experts within our staff that we can train to continue their expertise, but we'd be able to do internal training from that point on. So, the other sheet that I have in there is just examples of comments that are in the discipline for students that either had disruption or disrespect, just to give you an idea about what a disruptive event looks like where a student got a conference versus an ISS versus an OSS, just to give you an idea. So that's there for you. Do we have any questions for these folks? I'm not going to have them leave. They're going to stay here. But before we transition to our CCR folks to talk to us more specifically about restorative practices.
Do we have any idea on maybe the leading cause for disruptive behavior in school? Is it, I mean, is there any commonality of, even at different ages? I mean, I know I asked last time, what do you think the reason for the disproportionality is? I know that's and I ask those questions because I don't know. And just from what you're seeing, like, is it, like you mentioned, poverty, or is it just, I don't know, is there any idea about?
In my experience, I can't speak to that. I mean, I feel like there are different patterns to students' behavior based on what they need or what they're telling us that they need. We look a lot at data, for example, like when we always look at like the antecedent, like what happened before that. And so we always try to guess the function of their behavior.
So there's no antecedent that is more common than maybe would be?
Within certain groups of students, within individual students.
With individual, I don't know, with students of the students in elementary.
Right. I mean, I feel like a lot of times with students in elementary school, for example, it's a lot of typically, we're being asked to do something that we don't want to do. So a non-preferred task versus a preferred task. Or we're given a direction and we just don't want to do that. It can be as simple as raise your hand to get your teacher's attention. Well, I don't want to do that, so I'm either not going to do it or I'm going to be disruptive and I'm going to scream and be upset because that's really hard for me to follow a direction that either doesn't make sense to me or I just don't want to.
So elementary may be just time to learn the behavior.
Yes, and so that's where that teaching and learning comes into play. And with our kids that, we see those behaviors often, that's where our tier plans become like a big piece of their day because we take time out of the teacher's day, out of the student's day to teach them those expected behaviors and also how to handle the feelings when we either have to do something that we really don't like to do or someone asks us to do something that we don't want to. So we teach them, okay, we may not want to do that, but how can we manage ourselves so we can be okay enough to eventually get to where we need to be?
It's about missing skills.
Yeah.
Can I be okay when others around me are not okay? Every single time there's something going on, I have to become a part of that. What is in it? What can you do differently? When I'm having an overwhelming feeling like math is really hard for me, so I'm just going to misbehave to get out of here. So it's always looking for that missing skill of the why, and then what supports can you put in place. It's as different as every child, quite honestly.
I don't know if this is what you were asking, but it jolted a question to me. Do you guys keep track of any other statistics, like the kids on a regular basis in these categories? Do you keep track of anything like broken homes or no father in the home, or if they've moved 4 times in the last 4 years and they've just got ripped away from their friends? So that causes kids to, do you keep any of those kind of statistics?
At the middle level, we meet weekly. We call it a PIC meeting. It's principal, interventionist, counselor, and we're looking at that data. Like if you've had 3 buddy rooms in a week, or you're always having trouble with this certain adult, what could it be? And then that's when we're digging into their story a little bit more. We pull that kid in, we just have those conversations, we're talking to the parent, we dig into their story more because there are reasons for that behavior. And then we communicate that to those that need to know that information, so that not that you lower expectations, but that you understand what support they need and how do you hold this particular child accountable, because it can look a little different depending on the circumstances. So yes, a formal documentation of that, maybe not, but lots of conversations.
The reason I asked is, it was that kind of question, but because this looks like a big thing to swallow, you
Yeah.
know, and maybe if there's something that we can pinpoint to address, then maybe, you know, it might not, you can take smaller bites and try to do
I think
that.
one thing to mention, you know, there's so much stuff here, but just something even Shunton said, that sometimes we forget. I mean, just a few short years ago, if you had a 5-day ISS, you had 5-day ISS. There was no changing it. There was no, the kid worked through that, and okay, we're going to reduce that. So we've come a long way even for dealing with things differently that way.
One of the things we didn't show that is that we have reduced the number of times we're removing students out of class. It is a concerted effort that they've been putting forth and doing a nice job of it, certainly.
Do we work with parents? Like when you, so like if you have I don't want to, like a kid that is continually in there, and do we work with like training the parents, like, okay, like for an example, my daughter when she was little and she would get angry, we had a notebook that she could write in at night and leave on the bed, and we would like communicate that way so that it took the attitude out of it, which is basically a think sheet, right? And so, are we working with parents on that level?
So I know, like, especially when we move students to a tier 3 plan, for example, like we just had a meeting on Friday with a whole family, and we went over what the plan looks like in school, and the why behind what we're doing, and all of those types of things. And then we kind of shared with them. They ask, like, anytime that we meet with families, they ask, like, what can we be doing at home? So like, the student has a social story, so the social story is going to go home so they can practice the social story with the student at home. We're doing something with the timer, so then they were like, oh, well, we're doing this with the timer. Should we change that to modify with what you're doing? So we are kind of partnering with them of, you know, this is what we're going to be doing here, this is what's worked, and they've kind of shared that too, so that they had that input. So we were really in that partnership, and they were being heard of, like, this is what works for our kid at home. Maybe we could try some of those things at school too.
And they,
So,
they tend to be receptive?
I feel like the thing that helps, in my experience, I feel like they have been receptive, and the key point to that is the communication along the way. Times where I feel like it has not been successful has been when, like, I'm the first phone call of saying, like, oh, hey, I want to have a parent meeting and we're going to be on a tier 3 behavior plan and all this. But if we've communicated along the way, the teachers communicated, our team, like, just like they have the PIC team, we have a similar team in elementary, then I feel like we're all just coming together.
And do we see that on the secondary level too?
I think that's sometimes at middle school, and I bet Shunton sees it even more. Sometimes the initial reaction is, they should be way over this by now. We did this all through elementary school. They're old enough, they know the rules. And so it's kind of talking through that piece that we're still struggling in this area. Maybe this is why. These are the supports. It's going to look different than elementary, but these are some supports we could try, and just like a slow weaning, gradual release of that. So hopefully when they get to Shunton, they're all fixed.
Well, and sometimes they are not. And they are not. If a teacher, so for instance, if a teacher writes a student up, one of the first things that we look at is, have they made contact with the parent? Because our expectation is they put it in the SIS-K-12 parent log. And if they haven't, and sometimes what I do is I take the referral and I say, I need you to call, I'm not going to process this, I need you to call that parent. I need you to talk to that parent. And a lot of times, that's better than me calling and just saying, this is what's going to happen because he did this, because the parent wants to know the behaviors that are going on so they can, I want to give them the chance to fix that behavior also. So, yeah, so many times we may hold a referral, so a lot of those referrals that you saw that maybe there were no consequences, those are the type of referrals that are no consequences when we put it back in the teacher's court for them to call the parent, talk to the parent, and maybe they can come up with a plan.
Sometimes they don't bring that referral back after that, do they?
No, they do not.
It's definitely less scary as a parent to get a call from the teacher than from an administrator.
Yeah. What about RSA? How are you working with parents?
Well, one of the things for our K-8 students, every student has a target sheet, and the teachers track hour by hour, and then they will email home that to parents. And then also we have our monthly family fun nights events where we try to engage with our parents. We have various things that we do with them. Something else is that we have, we kind of used from restorative justice is that we try to do mediations with the students when they are having conflicts, and then if we need parent to be a part, then we try to bring the parent in on that also, just to try to make sure that it doesn't spread out into the community. But those are some of the main things that we do.
Thank you. Thanks.
You all ready for the Center for Conflict Resolution?
Yes.
All right. We have Tyron Anderson, Greg Winship, and Annette Lance.
Yes. Is it okay if I pull this podium back so we can...
That's just fine. And that microphone should be on that podium. It'll be a little easier to hear, maybe.
And try not to block the screen. Am I going to be okay there?
Sure.
Distinguished board members, administrators, and the A team. Good evening. We just want to start by thanking you all for allowing us this opportunity to come alongside you all in partnership in your ongoing efforts to educate young people. Thank you for this possible opportunity. I want to start by introducing my coworkers. This is Greg Winship. Greg is our restorative justice strategist and training manager. Greg heads the program we have with justice-involved individuals, both inside and outside prison institutions. Greg has a master's in restorative justice from Eastern Mennonite University, Center for Justice and Peace Building. This is Annette Lance. She is our executive director. She has a master's in conflict transformation from Eastern Mennonite University, Center for Justice and Peace Building. And I'm Ty Anderson. I am our school's coordinator. I have a master's in health, human performance, and recreation. Take this time to kind of go over what CCR does. The Center for Conflict Resolution was formerly the Community Mediation Center and has been around for over 20 years, serving the metropolitan area. Yes, ma'am. Serving the metropolitan area. We use restorative justice practices and provide structured, safe environments in an effort to empower people to solve conflict in their lives, giving them the tools they need to find peaceful solutions and choose understanding over escalating conflict. We believe by dealing with conflict in the early stages, CCR has demonstrated that many disputes can be resolved without harm or violence. It is our fundamental belief that all human beings are unique. There's only one copy of us around. Therefore, we believe that all people deserve to be treated with dignity. CCR serves the Kansas City metro area through 3 points of entry. Community. CCR helps communities navigate these lines of connectivity through neighborhood accountability boards, community trainings, neighborhood associations, and court diversion. Number 2, the justice involved. We aid the justice involved at the reentry centers and prisons by giving them a voice, by giving the residents a voice, as well as assisting staff, building upon restorative communities for residents, as well as the staff utilizing ongoing trainings. We are building a restorative community in prisons. Number 3, education. We prepare administrators and educators through a number of training programs, beginning with a 2-day training called Disciplinary Restorers. We help to maintain ever-evolving cultures with ongoing coaching by providing restorative justice coordinators. We teach conflict resolution workshops and peer-to-peer mentoring for students. And we include parents by providing parent workshops. We are concerned about people, and we are committed to our mission to helping people solve conflict by bringing restorative justice philosophies and values to our community, prisons, and school. So with no further ado, Greg?
Okay, so just want to say, before we get into this, how amazing these educators are and the amazing things that you're doing with social and emotional learning with kids. You all have this wonderful framework in place. We say that restorative justice, restorative practices is not a program, it's a way of life. So that's how we approach all of the work that we do. It's embedded in us. When we train others, we try to take them from a punitive mindset to more relationship-based mindset, which is, I believe, embedded in the work that you all have been talking about also. So this is going to give you an overview of restorative justice, of restorative practices, keeping in mind that this is a partner to what you all are already doing in the district, and actually takes it a step further when harm occurs. Restorative practices deals with harm in very specific ways, and we'll get more into that. So just a quick, the World Health Organization, some of the risk factors, which you all were just talking about earlier, for youth violence, low commitment to school, suspensions, exposure to violence in the home, low income, unemployment, association with delinquent peers or gangs, and then they go on to say some of the preventive or perfective factors, which includes the life skills and social development programs to manage anger, solve conflict, develop communication skills to solve problems. And they say that whole school approaches to violence prevention in educational settings is what works best.
So when we talk about restorative practices in schools, we'd like to get everybody kind of on the same page. If you were to say, how many people would say they know either like they've not heard of restorative practices at all, you know very little about it, you know a little bit about it, or you know a lot about it? Where would you go then? How many people would say they've not heard about restorative practices at all? Anybody in the room? We've been talking about it. How about a little bit? Think you know a little bit about the restorative practices? Somewhat about restorative practices? Anybody know a lot about practices, where they are? So let's get on the same page and see what restorative practices are, and start by defining what that looks like. Howard Zinn is considered by many to be a grandfather in restorative justice because he conceived of and participated in the first restorative practice in the United States back in the 1970s. He's written several books, including a book called Changing Lenses, as well as the little book of Restorative Justice, which are both considered foundational works to the restorative justice movement. His definition of restorative justice is that restorative justice is a process to involve, to the extent possible, those that have a stake in a specific offense, and to collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations in order to heal and to put things as right as possible. So what stands out to you here? What stands out to you as far as being important in this definition?
I think the word healing.
Healing?
Yeah.
Yes. What else?
Being able to collectively to do something, so we're not just separate actions.
So it's a group effort. So it's the people that are most involved and most affected by the harm, they're the ones that get to decide the outcome of that and how to heal that, right? What else?
Addressing the harms. So, she
I'm
said
sorry.
healing.
Healing
You
harm?
said healing and harms, so
Yes.
that's harms.
Right as possible.
As right as possible, because sometimes it's not always possible to make things exactly right the way they were, or better, right? So we make an effort to repair the harm to the best of our ability in that situation. Okay? There's another definition by a group called Amplify RJ. David Ryan Parsiga Castro Harris says that restorative justice is a philosophy, a set of practices rooted in indigenous teachings that emphasize our interconnection by repairing relationships when harm occurs, while proactively building and maintaining relationships to prevent future harm. Again, what stands out to you in this definition?
Our interconnection.
Interconnection. So restorative practices says that that we are all interconnected, that we are all a part of each other. It comes from the indigenous teachings that says, I am because you are. That have councils of elders that sit in session next to each other, and we hear the wisdom of the ages, right? We gather the wisdom from the past in order to solve the problems for the future. So it's rooted in all of those fundamental teachings, and it's found throughout the world. So restorative justice is the new name that we put to an old practice, right? This is found in First Nation tribes, indigenous tribes in this country, as well as tribes in Africa. The Maori tribe in New Zealand has practiced a form of restorative practices, what we call restorative practices or restorative justice, for years, and their entire juvenile justice system is based on a restorative process initially. So this is the wisdom for many people in many different countries, wrapped up into a fairly new term called restorative practices or restorative justice. We're talking about big picture right now of restorative justice. And let's make a distinction. So when we talk about restorative justice, some people say this is the bigger picture, the umbrella of these definitions, right? Of how we apply this practice, and it started in the criminal justice system. So when we refer to restorative justice, oftentimes people go immediately to the criminal justice system. Restorative practices, as we'll look at in just a minute, is one term that we use to define what restorative justice would look like in a school setting, right? Restorative justice in education is another term. Restorative discipline is another term that we use kind of interchangeably, but those terms often refer to the school setting, and we're looking at the big picture of restorative justice for right now. So let's look at one other thing to maybe get this ingrained in our head. In a typical criminal justice setting, and as you know, many of our schools have adopted policies that mimic the criminal justice system, with zero tolerance policies and zero tolerance policies for behavioral issues, right? So there's a similarity there that might be easier to see with the criminal justice system. In a typical criminal justice system, we have a judge, we have defense attorney and prosecuting attorney, we have what we call the victim and offender, right? In most cases, the lines connect to who talks to who. So the two attorneys talk to the judge. Each of the victim talks to the prosecuting attorney, the defense attorney talks to their client, the offender. But oftentimes we separate the victim and the offender. They rarely, if ever, get to talk to each other, right? There's no communication. We say we need to keep them apart so no more harm occurs, which is a valid concern. But we keep them apart and never let that repair happen, even when we want to, right? Even when they want to give an apology, we're told not to do it until after the court process, and sometimes not at all. We asked 3 questions in that process. Was there a law that was broken? If so, who did it, and are they guilty or innocent? If they're guilty or innocent, what do we do to them? Well, this is a punitive system based on retribution, so punishment is often what we do, right? So, in this setting, justice equals punishment. Okay, there's some type of punishment. If I'm speeding in front of a school zone, which I wouldn't be doing, right? But if I was speeding in front of a school zone and got stopped, the punishment might be paying a fine, right? I might be able to sign off on the ticket right there and pay a fine, and that's it. But there's a punishment involved. If it's a more serious crime, jail time might be involved, or prison time might be involved at some point. But we often hear people say that justice, in order to get justice, I need them to hurt. I need them to be punished. We hurt people who have hurt people to teach them not to hurt people. Let me say that again, because that's insanity to me, right? We hurt people who have hurt people to teach them not to hurt people. To me, all that does is teach them how to hurt people, right? Because we're hurting them, and that's showing them how to continue to hurt other people. What we need to do is break that cycle. And restorative justice gives us an opportunity to be able to do that. In a restorative justice setting, there are three main stakeholders involved. The victim and the offender are still there. We would often say the person who has been harmed instead of victim, the person who has caused the harm instead of the offender, and then the community. Who do you think makes up that community there?
Us.
Say that?
Us.
Yes, us. Any person that has a stake in that offense, right? Any person that was affected by the harm that occurred, right? According to definition. So, if you're the neighbor of a person who got robbed, you might be thinking, is my house next? I may have a stake in that offense and want to know what the outcome happens, right? So I may be able to be a part of that. It might include attorneys. This is not an either-or situation, right? They can work collectively together. And so you can have restorative processes that take place within the criminal justice system. And you can also have diversion programs that take people out of the criminal justice system into the restorative process. The questions that we ask are totally different. What's the harm, or who has been harmed? What needs have been created by the harm that's been done? If I'm harmed, what do I need in order to repair that harm, in order to make things right? So what needs arise out of that? And then whose obligation is it to meet that need? Restorative justice talks about relationships. It talks about the people that are involved. Whereas criminal justice talks about rules that have been broken and laws that have been broken. And doesn't necessarily build relationships, it separates them. So restorative justice is a way to bring people together to be able to address harms, needs, and obligations. In the next slide, you'll see 4 pillars of restorative justice set out by Howard. Needs and harms were actually put together as one, obligations and engagement. The way that when someone is harmed, creates needs, those needs create obligations. When the obligations are there, we meet those obligations through engagement, by bringing those people together, not keeping them separated, but by bringing them together and being able to deal with this. 2 things have to happen in order for us to use a restorative process. And I'll go back to this slide for just a second. First of all, the person who has been harmed, the victim, cannot be put in a situation where they're going to be re-victimized or reharmed, right? If that's going to happen, we don't want to use a restorative process because it's only going to cause more harm, and the purpose of restorative justice is to heal from that harm, right? In a restorative justice setting, justice equals healing instead of punishment. So if there's a chance that the victim is not going to be receptive or is not ready to meet with that person, we'll do something else until we can put them together, if we ever do that at all. The second thing is that the person that is the offender or the person who has caused the harm has to have a sense of accountability, a sense of responsibility. They have to take ownership of what they've done. If they don't take ownership of it, then the criminal justice system is set up for that. Because in a criminal justice system, I have to prove what you did. The criminal justice system says, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, right? So most of the time, the offender doesn't want to say anything because I know anything that comes out of my mouth is going to be used to hurt me or harm me or punish me. So why should I help you? Why should I talk about what happened? In fact, you're wanting me, the system says, don't talk or else you're going to be punished. In a restorative setting, what we want to do is say, if you've taken responsibility for this, if you are accountable for this, there might be consequences to your actions, but we're not going to punish you to punish you. In other words, we're not going to hurt you to teach you not to hurt other people. Consequences are a real factor with restorative practices, restorative justice. There are certain things that naturally happen when a harm occurs. And we want to recognize that. But I know people that have spent 20 years in a criminal justice setting and never once had to really accept the responsibility for what they did. A jury found them guilty. They didn't say they were guilty. They never were asked about it or talked about it. And after they served 20 years, they got out and nothing changed. Our recidivism rates are 50% after 1 year, 67% after 3 years, 77% after 5 years, and it goes up to 83% after 9 years. That's a system that's not working to me. Yes, sir.
Who determines whether the victim, who determines if the victim is going to be harmed again? Who makes that determination?
If the victim is going to be
Who makes
harmed.
that determination at what level? What do we gauge is harm? Okay, harm is psychological harm, is it physical harm? Who makes that determination?
So in a criminal justice setting, we would have a counselor or a PA or a DA or some other expert in that situation determine what the harm
I
is,
know
right?
that. I'm asking.
In a restorative justice setting, the people that are involved get to determine that. The victim gets to decide whether it's psychological harm for me, whether it's physical harm that I'm worried about, what type of harm that is, and I get to define what that is if I'm the one that's the victim. Other people in the community, in the example I gave before, if somebody's house is broken into and the neighbor is there, the neighbor gets to decide if they feel that they are harmed, they can be a part of this process. So let's take it to a school setting. Student acts out in class. Teacher responds to the student. That student may or may not have been harmed. The teacher may or may not have been harmed. They might be the victim and the offender here if a student lashes out at the teacher setting. But that community also includes who? All those other students in the classroom that saw that or heard that happen, right? It might include an SRO that has to come down and get the student and take them out of the classroom. It might include assistant principals or principals that have to deal with the disciplinary issues. It includes parents of both of these students, right? And it could go out from there. So there are a lot of people that could be involved in this process, but they get to determine if they have a stake in this offense and what their response would be.
A follow-up question would be then, I understand, thank you for that explanation, but we're talking about the severity of events at this point. Now, let's say we have a disruption in class, that's one level. What if we have a physical assault on a teacher? What's it look like then?
Good question. So, physical assault on a teacher. There is a state where they would be separated, right? To make sure no harm, that the victim is not re-victimized, right? The person who assaulted the teacher or whoever it was in that scenario needs to come to a place where we would be asking restorative questions. What happened? What were you feeling? Similar questions to what is done with some of the other programs that you're using, but there's a list of restorative questions we would go through. What's the harm? What are the needs? What are the obligations? How do we make this right? Are you willing to make this right? What does that look like? What are you willing to do to be able to make this right in this situation? Can you make this right? If you're not willing to do that, maybe that is a criminal justice matter. Maybe it goes to, I'm not willing to admit that I did anything wrong. I'm not willing to next time I see this person, I'm going to go after him again. That's a different situation, right?
And if they're not willing to admit a wrong, or what if the victim is not willing to accept?
If the victim's not willing to accept, so we can have partially restorative. So if we involve all three of these parties, it's a fully restorative process, right? Where the victim and the offender and the community is all involved. If the victim is not willing because I'm too shaken up by this or I don't ever want to see this person again, there are still things that we can do between the community and the person who's caused the harm to be restored, right? So we can still work with them. The community also could work with the victim, the person who's been harmed, without the offender present, right? And there are restorative processes that we can work with there. There are some restorative processes that just involve these two, a victim-offender dialogue, victim-offender mediation, if and when those are ready. But we can work with one part or more. People in prison do restorative justice or community service projects, but they don't get to interact with the community or interact with the victim, but that's still giving something back to society, doing something to try to repair a certain harm. So each one of these groups individually could also be involved in some type of restorative process. So there's multiple levels of of the restorative process involved. Does that help?
Thank you, yes.
Okay. Let's look at restorative practices in schools, more specifically. So that was the overview of restorative justice in general. Now we're going to focus on what that looks like in a school setting specifically.
Yeah. Okay, so just to speak to a few things right off the bat, restorative practices in schools are not soft on wrongdoing. That's one of the first things that we hear from people. You know, if there's not some punishment type consequence for what a person did, they're not going to learn their lesson. Sitting across from the person that I harmed, telling my story and listening to how that affected them is way harder to do than just going away from them and not ever taking accountability for that. So we encourage the accountability for the harm we've caused, which is harder to face the person. Restorative practices deal with the past because we have to tell that story. If we're not dealing with feelings, we're not really getting to the bottom of it. So we deal with the past, but then it's future focused. So we decide as a group when harm occurs what we need to happen to put that as right as possible. And then in a restorative practice, we seek to meet the needs of everyone involved. So at CCR, our theory of change is that conflict is caused by unmet or frustrated basic human needs. So when there's conflict, when there's a fight, when someone's being disrespectful, there's some unmet need there. That doesn't mean there's not consequences for harm that occurs, but we're going to dig in to get to that need. The key goals: to encourage accountability and responsibility through personal reflection, which is what you all are talking about here, and then to go into a collaborative planning process. Another goal is to create caring climates to support healthy communities, to listen and respond to the needs of the person harmed and the person who harmed. So again, we're talking about the whole community. Many of the schools that we go in, we train the staff, train the administrators, we train the students in conflict resolution workshops, and then when we leave from that place, we have circles in place where at least once a week in a homeroom or in some kind of class, they're doing a community circle where everyone is getting a chance to talk and have their voices heard. Kids don't get heard a lot. So there's the community aspect is we're talking to everyone in that community in a different way. We're having a different conversation. We're listening. We're setting a stage for people to have input and be part of that community in a different way.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
So just from your experience with schools, what would you say has been the difficulty with school leaders and teachers, any faculty making this paradigm shift? Because if there's something like really serious, like say a teacher got assaulted, or just something that most people are like, okay, they're out the door. I mean, how difficult is it to make that paradigm shift?
Yeah. So some people come into our 2-day training and they're on it like that. They're taking in the information, they're internalizing it. Some people it takes the 2 days. And there are a few people who never get there. But once people start seeing the value of helping to instill some intrinsic motivation in people, so we can tell people what to do when there's been harm. But that kind of the carrot and stick thing, we want them to come to that conclusion because it's the right thing to do. So when kids leave us, when they're seniors, we want them to be able to make good decisions. So if I am always telling somebody what needs to happen in a situation, then they're not learning that to do that on their own. So there are lots of different pieces. We bring in the trauma piece, We bring in the circle facilitation piece. So lots of different things, different ways to get at what we're trying to get at.
Thank you.
What do you hear from staff that like their hesitations are on it and why, and then how do you address that when you're in a training?
Yeah, so some teachers have things that they think work in the classroom and don't want to change. We hear a lot, here comes another program, we don't have time for this. So I'm thinking of a principal who, one of the teachers came and said, I don't have time to do circles. I don't have time to do restorative practices in my classroom. So that assistant principal went and sat in her class and timed the number of times that she had to redirect throughout the day. And she came up with like 40 minutes at the end of the day that teacher was having to redirect. So helping her see how much time and energy the whole class took to redirect students who were not doing what they were supposed to, and then getting her to try a circle where kids are getting to talk, getting to say what's on their mind, and that changed the climate of the classroom. So mostly what we hear from teachers is, this is great, my relationships are better, but there are some times when teachers are pretty dug into what they're doing and they just don't want to.
Are they ever concerned for like their safety in the transition process? Does
Their
that make sense?
safety,
like if, I don't know,
Like in the class setting, I mean,
yeah.
You know, like with more challenging circumstances, are they
Yeah.
concerned that it might be seen as soft?
Yeah.
Kind of like what they were saying earlier.
While you're making that transition.
And that someone may think, I'm not really
I can
being
get away with
punished,
Yeah.
so I can do whatever, and this is soft and I'm just talking.
Yeah.
Is that kind of like what you mean?
Yeah,
A
maybe.
little bit?
yeah, so do you have something to say to that?
So, as with any system, the kids are going to adapt to this and learn the system and learn how to abuse the system just like anybody else, right? There are people at one of the schools that we work with in Kansas City School District that has a restorative justice room and has restorative justice coordinators already set up there. Kids try to get out of one thing by getting referred to the restorative justice room, right? Because they know how to work the system sometimes in that case at a high school. So the system is not flawless in that regard, but what we're trying to teach and what we're trying to do is to create a safe space in the school for all involved, the teacher and the students in this case, where it's okay to say how you're really feeling. It's okay to talk about feelings. It's okay to talk about what's going on for you. It's okay to talk about that unmet human need. And the more, in one sense, the more vulnerable teachers are, the more vulnerable the class is also. When the teachers open up, we had a teacher whose car got broken into, and a stereo system got taken in the parking lot just before school. And when our restorative justice coordinator got there, she was not in a good mood. They were going to do a circle in the classroom, and she didn't want any part of it. She was like, not in the mood for this today. Larry, one of our staff members, convinced her to go ahead and just sit in circle, even if she didn't say anything about it, and said, really, the students need to hear what's going on for you today. They can all tell that you're in a bad mood. You know, something's going on with you. They need to hear something about that. When she ended up deciding to tell what happened, one of the student responses was, I don't remember what grade this was, but one of the student responses was to the teacher, I'm not going to ask to go to the bathroom 5 times today, or I'm not going to ask to, get a drink, or I'm going to be better on my best behavior today because I know you're going through something else. So the students saw what happened to her and related in empathy and putting themselves in that situation and changed the behavior simply because she was open to be vulnerable to that situation. They saw them as people, and it built relationships, built connections in that classroom, and made them further in that room.
So I have a question. Isn't some of this, though, just fundamental in being an effective teacher and having relationships with your students. Because I believe any effective teacher is going that relationship piece.
Yeah, and going to, if a kid is not doing what they're supposed to and talking back or whatever, a restorative response would be, what's going on for you today? And not, you're not doing your assignment, get out of my class, right? So there are ways to de-escalate a situation, not go right to, you're not doing what you're supposed to, you need to get out. So asking those kinds of questions, what's going on for you, pulling them aside. Restorative practices are not necessarily crisis intervention, which I think you were getting to. If a student is coming at me with, physically, I'm going to make sure that everybody's safe, whether that's calling the SRO or calling someone from the office, whatever it takes to interrupt that thing that's happening, to separate people, and then start working through it until we can come back together.
So if I'm hearing correctly, it's not replacing our current system or programs, it's in addition to, it's fortifying.
It can work in conjunction with what's already in place. It's how we go about doing that and the way that we utilize that. Restorative justice or restorative practices are not crisis intervention, right, as Annette said. So in the heat of a moment, you're not going to sit down and want to talk to somebody. That's the time for an SRO to be called or something else to happen in the classroom. We want preventative measures and intervention measures before and after that occurs, hopefully before, so that doesn't ever have to happen. But if it does, we can work on the other end also.
So if it's an additional layer, can it be an additional layer without changes in district policy?
Can it be, did you say?
Yeah.
We would say no, because the policy needs to reflect the attitude of this philosophy. Remember, restorative justice, we said at the beginning, is a philosophy. It's a set of practices. It's a mindset change. It's a lifestyle change. It works well with BIST and with PBIS and trauma-informed care because it has parts of those. You've heard similar statements from these experts talking about what they do with BIST or PBIS. There's a similarity there because they draw on some of the same values. And so it dovetails nicely with a lot of the programs that you already have implemented at the school. But what it goes further to do is to bring those people into connection and resolve that and say, how do we keep this from happening in the future? In being able to look at the future plans and provides an alternative to what the discipline is in the school setting as just a punitive response.
One other thing I'll just point out, often when harm occurs and we separate people, they're doing their think sheet or whatever, sometimes we miss the step of bringing those people together for facilitated dialogue where they are storytelling, telling what happened for them, and then deciding how they want to move forward. So that reintegration piece is very important. How do we bring them back into the classroom after there's harm so that people feel safe, the rest of the class feels safe, so that everyone feels safe in that. And then that last piece to change the system when it contributes to the harm. So I think maybe that's what you were getting to, the policy thing. Kansas City Public Schools, who we have worked with most recently, have completely revamped their discipline structure to use restorative practices first before they're suspending or doing anything like that. A charter school that we're pretty heavily involved in, there was a fight between 3 boys in the cafeteria one day. Their response to that would have usually been suspension, 10-day suspension. Our restorative justice coordinator worked with each boy individually, talked it through, what was going on with them, and then eventually got to the place where he could bring them together to have a conversation, and they cleared it up. We also work with people who are fighting about what they're going to say to their friends and people around them, because that affects the community too. So school districts and schools are just looking at through a different lens about things like that. And it doesn't take a whole revamping. It takes maybe adding a section of restorative practices to that policy. Some districts are asking teachers to have circles once a week to build that relationship, so it just depends on the school and where they're going with it.
I think it would have to depend on the situation as well, because it's the victims in a fight are not always the ones perpetrating the fight. There are other victims.
Right.
And the policy is going to have to be different. There's going to have to be multiple sets of policies.
Say more about that? Multiple
Well,
sets.
okay, so let's say if I have two boys fighting in a hallway, and a girl is standing there and gets shoved up and it hurts, knocks out a tooth, whatever. Who do we suspend? Do we not suspend at that point? We have another victim here. So there's going to have to be a fine balance, I would think. I don't know if that's what Kansas City's doing. Maybe I'll ask Mark the next time I talk to him. But you know, I think there has to be something for that victim as well.
So that victim would be brought into that process and help decide what needed to happen to make it as right as possible.
So we're giving that victim the ability to say, yes, I think you need to suspend these two. Is that what we're saying?
That could be one thing they want, yeah.
We have legal counsel sitting here in the room, and I think that would be a major
Yeah,
issue.
that doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. Just because a victim wants something, that doesn't mean that's going to happen. So some transformation stuff happens when we're sitting across from each other telling our story to each other. So a lot of people come in wanting somebody to go to jail or to be suspended, and they don't end up there.
And how do you handle the community when the community is outside of the school itself?
So if there are people who are, did I do that? Okay. If there are people, say family members, who are involved in that issue too, which we see a lot of issues that start in school that bleed out into the neighborhoods to family members, or it might start out here and then come into the school and something happens between those kids, we're going to talk with all of those people. So we have done several 5 or 6 family mediation processes where we talk to each person individually. It's time consuming but worth it. So they tell a restorative justice practitioner their story. We help them think through what they might need, what they might want to say, and eventually we'll bring people into a room, have the kids who were the main players sitting here, and their family members sitting here, and then at some point they come into the conversation too. So it's a very transparent thing. And we try to gather everyone who's involved in it and bring them in on the conversation.
And when you say we talk to them, who is the we?
The restorative justice coordinator, or somebody from our office, or somebody who's trained in restorative justice or restorative practices and able to be that kind of all partial facilitator.
It might help to understand that the restorative justice coordinator is one of those staff members I said we need to hire. So we do not have the staff members currently that would do this. That would be a person that's what they would do.
In your original, one of your original slides, you referred to indigenous teachings. I think sometimes we go overboard and want to make sure we don't say religious, because I actually agree with everything you said here. These are biblical things about forgiveness and reconciliation and things you're talking about here right now. I'm in agreement with all this stuff. But you haven't convinced me yet that we need to add additional costs and something like this over and above what these guys right here are already doing in our schools.
Okay, so I wanted to let you talk and then we'll talk it out.
Okay. Is there ever a time that we don't bring all these people together and talk to them, that we actually do have to eliminate one person from the situation in the form of ISS or OSS? Or are you saying we would never do that? Or an example, somebody assaults a teacher physically. The teacher may have said something that irritated him, but didn't initiate the assault. Now, you're going to let that person come back, or is there ever any consequences that they must have for whatever they do?
So you're asking if there ever needs to be punishment?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, and sometimes there does. For very, very hard situations like an assault, that person might need to be separated from their community for a while. But then what needs to happen before they come back and we plop them back in the classroom is some kind of a restorative process where they're talking to that teacher, hearing how the teacher was harmed, they're telling their story, so there's that engagement piece before they just come back into the setting that set them off in the first place.
Well, I feel like we're doing that through what I've heard here already. We're getting both sides of the story, but we still need to deal with the agitator, and then there are times that we don't put that student back with that teacher. Is that appropriate under this program?
Case by case.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
From what I'm hearing, and I'm interested because, I mean, we give these examples of the extreme cases, but we live in Raytown, and most of these cases are disruptive and disrespectful behavior. And it's just my opinion maybe is that a lot of this has to do with past occurrences of harm and lack of trust between the students and those staff members. And I think with the restorative practice and having been able to just talk about past harm that's been done, because I know even since I've been on this board, I've got countless cases of parents even in tears about something that's happened to them in our district, to their kids. And I'm not to judge who was right and who was wrong, but I know that carries over. And when they call me about a specific incident, it's never just that one incident. It's really something that started a long time ago. My very first board meeting, it was just something, just of that nature. Can't get into it, but it was just something that felt like that person wanted to heal. And I think that's something that we don't have. And because of the disproportionalities that we see, because of just what we know is already going on, we know that what we have right now is not enough.
And I would piggyback on that and say that we're doing an excellent job, but when I think Alonzo was asked the question, why is all of this happening? That's something that's like a question mark, and I think we also need to do something different.
I'm just going to add my little 2 cents to that too, because I think this offers a process of healing. The district does have a lot of programs, but I think this offers us a process to our young people, especially our high school kids, because when they do something, it might be on a serious nature, but most of the incidents are not serious where they have assaulted a teacher or anything like that. And what concerns me and says to me that the program is not effectively working that we do have, because the number of black students that are receiving ISS or OSS is greater than any other ethnic group. So that tells me that we have an issue, and we've got to face that. With all of the programs that we have, we got an issue, because when we have more blacks receiving OSS, especially OSS, because that takes them out of the learning environment, we're creating our future, and that concerns me. We got a problem, and I think this will help us.
So one of the costs that we have is that adult training, and someone spoke to that, a couple people spoke to that earlier. If all the adults in the district are speaking the same language, are reacting to disrespect and harm in the same way, then that says something to students. Another cost is the conflict resolution training for all the students. Every student would get a 6-session conflict resolution workshops so that they're all speaking the same language, so that they have a tool when someone sets them off to do something different than just go after them or fight or whatever. So fighting among youth, violence among youth is on the rise. I know Raytown doesn't have it like Kansas City Public Schools does, but it's on the rise. And this is offering something that will reverse that, take it down. It is a different way to look at things, a different perspective.
I wanted to touch on the trauma piece. Those things build up and build up and build up. If a student gets suspended, we know they're much more likely to be involved with the criminal justice system, right? Even just after one suspension. It's because, in our eyes, that process of separation has started and that hurt has never been healed. And if that hurt isn't healed and they learn to hurt again, then it keeps that cycle of violence going. Flanny Davis says if crime hurts, justice should heal. And if we heal those people that have been hurt, then there's no reason for them to have to lash out and hurt somebody else. We know hurt people, right? So if hurt people are healed, then we don't have people that are hurting that continue to hurt other people, and we break that cycle of violence. So when we do break that cycle through restorative practices, bringing those people together to hear what's going on for the other people, to face the other people when and where possible, to be able to make a plan on how we're going to move forward without hurting each other continually and healing from the harm that's been done. We break that cycle of violence that's been going on.
Yeah, just a question, and looking at the data. I know that we do not just suspend kids when they're brought to the office for disruptive behavior. If you look at the logs, and I'm looking at my assistant principals here, logs upon logs of where certain interventions were tried prior to a suspension. Now, hearing that from us, that we have an A, B, C, D, E, or F before we suspended, taking it to the restorative practice side of things. Okay? How many times do we're obviously, suspension is where we don't want to go, but repeat offenders, repeat. How many times do they get to repeat and offend in restorative practices before they finally have to be suspended?
Again, that's a case-by-case basis with that school or the people that are involved. Our question would be, what's the need that this person has that they continue to repeat offend? Right? What did we not get right the first time they offended that caused them to repeat that action and think that that was the best behavior they could exhibit? So what do we need to do to go back to find out what that root need is, what that cause is, so we can say, how do we correct this? How do we meet this need so that they don't feel like they have to hurt people, repeat offend?
I may be wrong, and maybe my principals can correct me, but I think what we've tried to do is second chance, grace, second chance, understanding behavior, talking about the behavior, involving parents about the behavior, and it sounds a lot like what you're trying to do, and we haven't been able to meet that obviously need for some of our kiddos. How's that met with restorative practice? How do you meet what's the magic pill?
So there is no magic pill, but one of the things that might be missing, and I don't sit in on your conferences, is that you put a bunch of adults in a room with a student or a child, and that's, one, intimidating and scary, And so in restorative practices, we don't do things to people or for people, we do them with people. So we're going to stop the slide presentation here in a minute and find out where you all want to go with the questions, but let me just say, restorative practices take the responsibility for the well-being of the school. Not only lands on the adults, but lands on the students too. So that everyone in that environment is responsible for the well-being of that school and for each other. So if I'm a teacher, I'm in a classroom, I have this responsibility, this is my classroom, I have to teach, I have to do things right. If I can release that and share that responsibility with the students, they're going to learn something, they're going to feel differently about the class, it's going to change the whole dynamic of that classroom, because they have power now. Our kids don't have power over things that involve them, that affect them. So that changes this.
I was going to say that we did want to try to keep it to 2 hours today, but this is your time. And we're going to stop the presentation here. I will mention a couple things that they didn't hit on yet that might be helpful as just little tidbits of information. Restorative practices does, and we are kind of stuck on the very serious behaviors. It also addresses the quite minor behaviors, to where you might have a student that is disruptive in the class. The teacher may actually stop class for a moment and have the students do a circle time there and walk through, why are we doing this? How does that make folks in the class feel about it? How does it make me feel about it? Why are you like this today? What might you give us as some feedback as to why you're doing this today? So it is a pervasive kind of program throughout the school. We did, and I talked with these good folks earlier on this afternoon, about how do we address the seriousness, because that is our concern. What do you do with a student that is truly assaulted? There is a 100% victim and 100% offender in this situation. And I don't want to ever see that person again. They've harmed me seriously. I would say that those are certain situations we need to keep in mind. They don't necessarily dictate, as you were alluding to, the outlier situations don't necessarily need to be generalized for the whole program. But the program is something that could be beneficial to us. It fits fairly good with what we have been doing already. It's not a huge shift. As Bobby has mentioned so eloquently, we see the numbers. We do see the need to continue to make improvements down this road. And so part of what the question is can we continue to make improvements with the programs we have in place? Do we need to morph that into something that is perhaps a little more comprehensive? That's a decision that we need to make. These people are still here, they're the experts. I don't want to stop the questioning, please continue, but we are going to not go any further into the presentation because of time.
And Dr. Huff, do we have data, statistics on the results, how change has occurred in the school districts that they've worked with?
I would leave that to them.
So we were getting to, those were the shifts I was talking about. The authority acts more of a convener, responsibility for well-being, restorative lens, so quantitative data. So these are some studies that we put together that we thought would be interesting for you. You want to do this?
This is one of the Kansas City high schools. You can see the data from 2017-18, 18-19, and 19-20. There was a decrease of students with 5 or more disciplinary reports, decreased by 38% over that time period. By implementing the restorative practices, they had a 2-year grant to be able to implement that, and that was one of the processes that they saw decreases. Also total suspensions, which included their ISS and OSS populations, decreased by 37% in that same time frame. One of the other schools, a charter school, had a decrease of 63% in behavioral issues, office referrals, simply by implementing restorative practices. After a 2-day training, this was the following year, they saw that decrease simply because of the mindset and the philosophy of implementing a less punitive, more restorative practice and circle processes in that school. And then this is West Oakland, California. We take a lot of our material and lead from RJOY, Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, which operates in the Oakland Unified School District. West Oakland is one of their schools. Suspensions declined by 87% and expulsions went to 0 at Cole Middle School during implementation of restorative justice in that situation. So there's a number of studies that say, yes, this works to different levels. I would caution about just looking at suspensions and decreases in ISS and OSS as a marker to measure this. You as a board and the school district needs to come up with what those measures are to say this is a successful program and what do we want in this district to be successful. What determines what that success rate looks like? Is it just not having as many people in ISS or OSS, or is it something more? Is there more of a difference in wanting to be able to say our students are getting out of school and being able to deal with the conflict in the situation with the process that they've learned in school, so that a teacher or a police officer or whoever doesn't have to be present in order for them to learn how to deal with conflict in a different manner, to learn how to peacefully resolve conflict, to learn how to put into practices what the victim and the offender are both feeling and expressing, and having that process to come together to be able to do it. So how do we measure that success, and what evaluative measures do we put in place to be able to measure that as we move forward?
Also, just for clarity purposes for me, I know that you have training that will be offered to everyone, but the process or the system or the program that you have is not, and I'm just asking, is not effective unless we hire staff that is directly focused only on restorative practices?
So best practices, evidence-based programs state that restorative justice is a process that is best used if it's entire school-wide or district-wide implementation. If it's piecemeal, it doesn't work. It sends a confusing message with people that are using restorative practices versus people that are using still punitive measures, and it's too easy to say it doesn't work, right? So we would suggest, and best practices suggest, that a whole school or a whole district model is the way to go. And being able to implement this over a period of time, a long period of time, where the change can be gradual and can be seen and can be district-wide, and it can be measured in the results over that time period, are most effective.
And thank you very much for that information. And perhaps I'm asking my question probably, or perhaps I'm not framing it well. But with this process, must you hire full-time people to oversee the process, or it will not work? That's the question.
Okay.
So there are schools that we have trained where our staff is there 2 days a week. So the best practice is you have somebody in the school all the time that knows the kids and can do the processes. When it comes up, they can go help a teacher facilitate a circle, or they're on site. But there are schools that we've had pretty good luck with, that our staff goes and is there for a couple days a week. Some schools just 1 day a week, sometimes 2. So there are variations on that, and they're still being successful.
If I may, I think the answer to that would be we would have to hire someone. We don't have the resources for people. They're doing their thing, is what I'm saying. We'd have to hire new people to take on that responsibility.
The problem this has been all along is this is a very inefficient model. Very inefficient. It takes a lot of time. And that takes staff. Inefficient isn't bad. It just means it takes time. And so these folks up here, I would imagine, if we asked you to do circles for a few hours a day, you probably have some severe reactions to that. Because they're doing the best they can with what they have. We have to have somebody that's dedicated to doing this. So yeah, in my opinion, yeah, we need staff.
if we did go out for an RFP on this, I would like to see not just those kind of statistics from the bidders, but we would need to see those stats compared to what system they were using prior to that. Because we can already see those stats in our own numbers.
We actually
have drastically reduced our numbers all across the board by what we're doing right here.
Don't disagree with you. Our stats are not where we want them to be.
No, they're never.
But yeah, we have reduced our suspensions pretty substantially over the last few years.
I'd like to see the data on the retention rates of staff, teachers that have gone through this process. And if it, how many left, how many stayed, how many bought in. It'd be nice to know going in if this is something we're going to do. And if it was high, then I want to know how they did it and follow the process.
So our disproportionality rates, that is something that we are very focused on right now. And that is glaring. We can say our suspensions have decreased, but our disproportionality is not, and it's decreased, not enough. And we have work to do there. I would be very interested in that as well. We can write the RFP to bring the data that you want.
That's what I think you should do.
Yeah. I do not disagree. And actually, there's a good restorative practices that has a pretty good, base of research out there right now too. So I'd be interested. I haven't really looked at that specifically about disproportionality with schools that are in districts that are implementing restorative practices. But that would be very interesting to see if that is making a difference. And I'll say that you've heard me say this before. Our disproportionality is not where we want it to be. It is actually better than national averages. So we are not an outlier there, but we are not where we want to be.
I might be an outlier here, but us doing this is not my experience or any experience I've heard about in this district. And the numbers, how many less OSS or ISS or reports, what we're looking for, I'm thinking, is a change in behavior and a welcoming environment for all, equitable environment, and that's what we don't have. And what we're doing ain't working. It's my opinion.
And one should lead to the other, shouldn't it? Good environment.
And it's a safe environment. And I'm not talking about doing away with extreme any things that we need to do to discipline our kids. I'm not talking about that at all. But I'm saying, like you said, you believe in all of this, and so that makes it the right thing to do. Not just by some measure of how this is gonna work. Or, because there's a whole lot of ways we can look at this. We might not be disproportionate at all. Because how many of our families in different, black, white, multiracial, how many of those families proportionally in each group live in poverty? How many of those families have 2 parents at home? How many parents, you know what I'm saying? When we look at it, we go deeper into the data, we can make it say whatever we want it to say. But it's really about the healing. For me, this whole thing is about student achievement and increasing our enrollment. And I know there's a lot of people, that disproportionality, that's what we say it, we believe that, but I think a lot of people don't come and a lot of people leave because of it. And that's a cost. The cost of not doing something. And we can say, well, I believe in this district, this is our biggest issue outside of COVID. Outside of that, I'm on this board because of this issue. I've had 5 black males go through this district. And like I've said this before, it was like trying to get through an obstacle course. And with 2 parents and all of that. So it's a very emotional issue for me because none of my kids are in this district anymore, but I want to see something changed. And the numbers, I'm not impressed either way by what we've done or or what's been said about the numbers, I know that that's what we need to do.
I agree.
And I really like the victim having a voice in the process. I think that we have an excellent process in place, but I think this would add that dimension that would bring in the victim, because hurt people do hurt people.
Sure. And you know, the big base of this is relationship. Lonzo really hit on it right there, that it's about building good relationships between students and between students and adults. That there should be, every student should feel wanted and should have somebody that they could identify as somebody they can go to and talk with. And that is absolutely a basis to a successful school, and this is part of what this program is about, is helping to heal relationships. We want to establish relationships and then heal relationships. So even if we don't decide to go this direction, that being a focal point is pretty solid. It's pretty solid. Any other questions for our CCR people?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
And our 18.
You are amazing. Thank you for amazing.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I think what we're hearing is the board wants us to put out an RFP. Is that what we're hearing?
Yes.
Yes.
If you would like, we can draft an RFP to bring, maybe informally to the board, to go back and forth, and bring to the board next month.
Yeah, that's 2 weeks from now.
It's true, it's next month, it's 2 weeks.
You're gonna miss us
Which means
next
we have
week.
to have it done by 2 We can put a rough draft together for the next board meeting.
Brian, did you say we would get a chance to see the RFP before you put it out?
Well, what we can do is bring it to the board for review.
And then you approve it at the board meeting?
So typically what we do is, and actually you're going to see an RFP at this next board meeting for norm reference testing. And usually it's just in consent, and you say, you know, we bless it, send it on. This one you might want to pull out and actually discuss.
You get it the week before, it'll be attached to the board agenda.
Okay.
And then everybody take a look at it.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we capture what everybody is saying that they want to see in
And I
it.
would suggest, let's get the questions going before even the meeting comes, so we can clarify some things.
Will the RFP encourage the bidders to offer levels of assistance, so we can maybe do, if we can't afford $2 million a year, maybe there's something that we can't afford to do?
You know, we can have it be piecemealed out, and actually
Well, not
with
piecemeal,
the,
And it's not a year,
We can
right?
have
What's that?
alternate bids.
It's not a per year million. The million is.
right, that's over 5 years actually.
Yeah.
And that's for
So 200,000 a year.
about, it's not exactly $200,000 because there are some years that are higher than
Yeah,
others.
we're just guessing right now, actually, on the dollar amount.
Yes.
That's actually not a guess. It's a fairly accurate estimate. We got to work with CCR, and they gave us a pretty accurate estimate. That's just the PD though. That's not staffing. So now, and part of the PD, they mentioned having, you know, a staff member at our facilities.
Yeah, 20 staff, that is going to be $1 million a year.
Okay, so, right, the staff that I talked about would be permanent staff, but part of the proposal actually is to have some of their staff actually at our building for a period of time, like for a year. That wouldn't be like every day, so they might split between a couple buildings or something, but they'd be able to model what we would want to do on a continuing basis. And so we would slowly wean off of that to where we would just have experts that we would train, that would be able to continue to train our folks. Because like, you know, BIST, we send new staff members to BIST every single year because we're always getting new staff members. And we do refresher trainings. So you don't just ignore it. I mean, we did the big training, now we're ignoring it. It is constantly training up. And that's how this would be too. So I hear, what are some major points you want me to put in the RFP? I hear piecemeal it out.
No.
No, we're not saying piecemeal.
Okay.
But different
Different levels.
options, different.
When you say different levels, then do you mean?
Well, I don't know. I don't
just
know enough
elementary?
about what they're,
I think we just, the program.
is there anything
the
other than
program
putting a
is
full-time
successful.
person in each building that?
I think whatever they think, this proposal is whatever they think would be successful.
Yeah.
And how much that would come.
That's usually how we would say it, is what we would need for a successful program.
All right.
Yeah, scope work, yeah. I did hear some stats, though. So maybe some
Thank
examples of
Donna said.
previous work
Donna.
and
Right.
successes.
Certainly be in the references.
Yeah.
And then the teacher retention part of it, once implemented.
So teacher retention being one part of it.
I can get the one from Kansas City.
Hey, Brian, will that estimate that you gave about $250,000 a year, that's like the first year, or you're talking about a continuation? Because if we buy the program, or are we going to be looking at $250 each year?
No, that was really for a 5-year to get us all up and running. And then after the 5 years, there would be a much lower cost to maintain. Yeah, it's actually closer to 220, and each year is not exactly that. It varies a little bit based on what you're doing each year. So they'd phase in. We'd start off with the secondary with this program. Start off with the secondary because that's where we have the most immediate need. Elementary is already doing a program that is so similar that they don't really need to dive into this right away. Also keeping in mind that if we do something like this, we need to think about what we would want to take away. Because it's very hard on people to have multiple programs going at once. And, there would need to be a discussion where if we went this heavy down this road, maybe we don't do BIST anymore. Maybe we don't do PBS anymore. And that's where we would really want to involve staff in seeing, what's the capacity? What do we want to keep? What do we want to mold into something that's new? What do we want to completely scrap?
We are seeing the issue more so in secondary anyway, like you said.
Well, right. That's where we see the disproportionality. That's where we see the higher suspension rates. That's where we also see the more serious behaviors.
And he also said that a lot of the stuff in BIS, they're like kind of done with it anyway.
They are.
So in a certain sense, so
Yeah. And so what we have done has been this modification of BIST, which again, has been effective. We have seen a drop in suspensions. We have seen a decrease in disproportionality. It just isn't going in the, we have a lot further to go.
I don't know if this would be something for next time, but just maybe being able to look at what the parameters of success would be, because that would vary from school or from districts. So like, what does success actually look like? Being able to define it, that way we know if we take this on, if it's actually working.
I would like them to give us some examples of the change in disproportionality over time in the district. And
You can ask for that in the RFP.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We'll put it in the RFP. That's pretty easy information to gather. Okay, well, and if you think of anything, just email me. I'm probably going to work on it pretty heavy tomorrow.
All right, is that it? All right, I move that the board adjourn the regular Board of Education meeting at 8:04 p.m.
Did we get there?
Was that really it?
Yeah, I think so.
It doesn't matter whether it is or not.
She said it was.
Did you want to go home or something?
See a way to answer. Motion made, seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.
Oh, gosh, darn it.
That was damn she done.